I'm sorry, sir, but due to an aircraft change, we've had to reassign some seats. Your new boarding pass is for 34B, a middle seat in economy. The gate agent, Lindsay, said. Her voice was a practiced mix of fake apology and cold corporate script. Major James Jim Mallory, 86 recipient of the Valor of Freedom Medal, stared at the thin new boarding pass, then back at his original first-class ticket. Jim quietly adjusted the collar of his worn, neatly pressed coat. His calloused hands firmly gripped the first-class ticket for seat 2A. The ticket was a gift from his grandson, Tommy, who had saved points and money to ensure his grandfather could travel comfortably to Washington for a veterans ceremony at Liberty Hall. Approaching the counter, Jim presented his ticket. Without even looking up, Lindsay scanned it, typed briskly, and printed a new pass. I'm afraid we had to accommodate our elite loyalty members first, she continued flatly. You've been reassigned to 34B in economy. Jim frowned in disbelief. There must be a mistake. My first-class seat was confirmed months ago. Lindsay shrugged. Our policy does not guarantee seat assignments in the case of aircraft changes. And frankly, sir, you are not the type of passenger we prioritize. Jim paused, stunned, then slowly stepped away from the counter. His hand tightened on the economy boarding pass, a symbol of silent humiliation. Jim sat down quietly at the crowded gate area, the cold boarding pass still crumpled in his aging hand. Around him, passengers bustled, oblivious to the quiet injustice. His back, stiff from old battlefield injuries, ached against the unforgiving plastic chair. He gazed out the window as the Pacific Skies Airlines jet waited on the tarmac. His heart sank. Tommy had spent weeks planning this trip, sacrificing savings and frequent flyer miles to buy his grandfather comfort and dignity. Jim clenched his jaw at the bitter irony. The loudspeaker crackled. First-class passengers for Flight 851 to Washington may now begin boarding. Jim closed his eyes at the cruel announcement. He remembered how much he had avoided special treatment all his life, always choosing humility over recognition. But this stung. A memory floated back Tommy's words when he had booked the ticket. Grandpa, if there's any problem, use the hero's liaison number. It bypasses the main customer service. Jim hesitated, then reached into his worn leather wallet and pulled out the small card. The number was still there. He exhaled deeply, debating. With a resigned shake of his head, Jim picked up his phone and dialed. Jim stared at the small card in his hand, the embossed numbers catching the light from the overhead fluorescent panels. His thumb brushed over the words Pacific Skies Airlines, Heroes Liaison Desk. For a long moment, he considered putting it back in his wallet. Jim had spent his entire life avoiding special treatment, preferring to blend into the crowd despite his accolades. But Tommy's voice echoed in his mind. Grandpa, this line is different. It's for people like you. Don't be afraid to use it. He sighed and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a calm, professional voice answered. Pacific Skies Airlines, Heroes Liaison Desk. This is Daniel. How may I assist you? Jim kept his tone level. Factual. This is Major James Mallory. I'm booked on Flight 851 to Washington. I had a confirmed first-class seat. I was downgraded at the gate to 34B. I'm a recipient of the Valor of Freedom Medal. My grandson booked this months ago. There was a pause, followed by the rapid clicking of keys. Thank you for your service. Major, please stay at your current gate. I'm escalating this immediately. Someone will be with you very shortly. The line went dead. Jim stared at the silent phone in his hand. He wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or resigned. Slowly, he placed the phone back into his coat pocket, leaned back, and closed his eyes, the chaos of the terminal fading to a dull murmur around him. As Jim sat quietly, unaware, far away at Pacific Skies headquarters, urgent alerts had already begun flashing on executive screens, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon change everything. The Montana wind howled through the rugged hills of Cedar Falls, shaping the small town and the boy who would grow to be Major James Mallory. Born in 1937 to a farming family, Jim learned early the values of hard work, resilience, and humility. Life was simple and harsh. The cracked earth, blistered hands, and relentless chores molded a quiet strength within him. Jim was always a boy of few words, preferring the silent companionship of the open land and the animals he tended. School was a challenge, not because of lack of intelligence, but because duty often called him back home to help with the harvest. As the world edged toward war Young Jim followed the same path as many sons of Cedar Falls he enlisted. The decision was neither impulsive nor born of bravado. It was quiet duty. The Army became his new home. The structured discipline felt like a natural extension of the hard work he had always known. Jim rose through the ranks, slowly but steadily, never chasing medals, only doing what he believed was right. Years later, that same steady resolve would define him in battlefields far from the tranquil hills of Montana. But for now, the boy who had once carried heavy buckets of water for cattle would carry a nation's hopes in a soldier's uniform. The humid heat of Southeast Asia bore down like an unrelenting weight. Major James Mallory, now a seasoned soldier, found himself far from the windswept hills of Montana, deep in the dense jungles of the Vietnam conflict. Assigned as a platoon leader, Jim was known among his men for his calm presence under fire. He didn't shout commands, he led by example. His unit respected his quiet resolve and unwavering dedication to bringing every soldier home. One fateful day, under heavy enemy fire, Jim's unit was pinned down. Without hesitation, Jim exposed himself repeatedly to pull wounded comrades from danger, rally his disoriented men, and organize a counter-defensive. The firefight stretched on for hours under punishing conditions. Jim's actions that day were later described as extraordinary valor, exceeding the call of duty. He was severely injured but refused evacuation until every man was accounted for. His leadership saved countless lives. For his heroism, he was awarded the Valor of Freedom Medal. Yet, Jim never spoke of it back home. To him, the medal belonged not to him, but to the memory of the brave soldiers who didn't return. Returning stateside, Jim carried permanent back injuries and the invisible weight of those memories. He resumed life quietly, rejecting parades and ceremonies. His life became a reflection of the values he had lived by humility, service, and silent strength. The years after service unfolded quietly for Major James Mallory. He returned to Cedar Falls, Montana, to the familiar rhythms of small-town life. Though the pain in his back never fully subsided, he rarely spoke of it. Jim found comfort in the simple things: early morning walks, tending a small garden, and enjoying coffee on the porch as the sun painted the sky. The only person who knew the full extent of his wartime injuries was his grandson, Tommy. As a young man, Tommy idolized his grandfather not for his military record, but for his integrity, humility, and the unwavering moral compass he lived by. When Jim received an invitation to attend a special commemorative event at Liberty Hall in Washington, D.C., an event honoring decorated veterans from across the country, it was Tommy who insisted on handling every detail. Tommy saved for months, carefully redeeming frequent flyer miles and setting aside money to purchase his grandfather's first-class ticket aboard Pacific Skies Airlines, Flight 851. He wanted Jim to travel in comfort and dignity, free from the cramped quarters that aggravated his chronic back pain. Jim was reluctant at first, but eventually accepted, knowing it was important to Tommy. With the ticket secured, Seat 2A was confirmed. And for once, Jim allowed himself the small luxury of anticipating an easy, peaceful journey. As he approached the bustling terminal at Newport International Airport on departure day, Jim could never have imagined the frustrating ordeal that awaited him just beyond the security checkpoint. At Gate C17 of Newport International Airport, the mood was indifferent efficiency. Lindsay stood behind the podium, tapping quickly on the keyboard, adjusting seat assignments and fielding boarding questions with cold detachment. Leaning casually against the counter was Mason, her junior colleague, who watched with faint discomfort as Lindsay processed passengers with robotic precision. Occasionally, he opened his mouth to comment but thought better of it. The buzz of the terminal filled the air as Jim Mallory walked slowly back toward the gate, gripping his downgraded economy boarding pass. His face, though calm, carried the weight of bitter resignation. Lindsay watched him approach and whispered to Mason with a smirk, "There's our problem passenger." Mason frowned slightly. "That's Major Mallory, isn't it? The veteran they just bumped from first class?" Lindsay shrugged. "Yeah, and partner miles don't trump our Diamond Elite clients. The rules are the rules. Besides," she paused, eyeing Jim with indifference, "he doesn't exactly look like someone we should bend over backward for." Mason shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The loudspeaker chimed, "First-class boarding for Flight 8521 is now underway." Lindsay straightened her uniform with smug satisfaction. "See the plane leaves with or without him whining. Policy's policy." Mason turned away, watching Jim quietly sit at the edge of the gate area, staring out the window in dignified silence. There was an unspoken tension in the air, as if the scales of justice had tipped too far in the wrong direction. Jim Mallory sat silently at the edge of the bustling gate area, watching as passengers queued and boarded, oblivious to the quiet injustice unfolding nearby. His weathered fingers absently traced the raised lettering on the Valor of Freedom medal card still tucked in his pocket. The decision weighed heavily. He had never asked for special treatment, but Tommy's voice echoed again. "Grandpa, this is different. It's for people like you." With a deep breath, Jim pulled out his phone and dialed the number printed on the Small Heroes liaison card. The call was answered after a single ring. "Pacific Skies Airlines Heroes Liaison Desk. This is Daniel speaking. How may I help you?" Jim spoke in a calm, measured tone. "This is Major James Mallory. I'm at Gate C17 Newport International. I had a confirmed first-class ticket for Flight 851 to Washington, but I was reassigned to 34B at the gate." There was a pause, then rapid clicking of a keyboard. "Major, I see your booking. I deeply apologize for this. Please hold for just a moment while I escalate this issue." Jim nodded silently, phone pressed to his ear. His eyes followed the jet outside the window as the final first-class passengers were called. The sun reflected sharply off the metallic surface of the plane. Daniel's voice returned, calm but urgent. "Major Mallory, thank you for your patience. Your situation has been escalated to our senior leadership team. I've been instructed to ask you to remain exactly where you are. Someone will be with you very shortly." Jim lowered the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. His gaze drifted out the window once more, the tension of uncertainty mingling with the discipline of a lifetime spent waiting for orders. Minutes passed like hours. Jim Mallory remained seated near Gate C17, his posture composed yet alert, the decades of military discipline visible in every calm breath. Around him, boarding announcements echoed, oblivious to the silent anticipation building at the edge of the waiting area. Mason stood awkwardly behind the gate podium, sneaking glances toward Jim. Something about the old veteran's quiet presence unsettled him. Lindsay, in contrast, seemed unfazed, busy tapping on her keyboard and chatting with another gate agent. The terminal lights flickered subtly as the last group of economy passengers were called to board. Outside the large windows, the sleek silver aircraft gleamed under the late afternoon sun, preparing for departure. Suddenly, a ripple of movement stirred the crowd. A cluster of sharply dressed airline executives appeared at the far end of the concourse, walking briskly, their expressions tense and focused. The group was led by Alexander Reed, President and CEO of Pacific Skies Airlines, flanked by two senior vice presidents and an assistant speaking urgently into a headset. Passengers stepped aside instinctively as the entourage approached. Mason froze at the sight, recognizing instantly that something very serious had happened. Lindsay frowned in confusion. "What are they doing here?" she muttered. The executives stopped abruptly at Gate C17. Alexander Reed scanned the area with sharp intensity. His eyes locked onto the lone figure of Jim Mallory, sitting quietly by the window, unaware that the next moments would shift the balance of dignity and respect back in his favor. The bustling terminal seemed to pause as Alexander Reed, president of Pacific Skies Airlines, strode purposefully toward Gate C17. His tailored suit did little to hide the urgency in his steps or the tension in his expression. Passengers nearby instinctively quieted, watching the rare and dramatic entrance of corporate leadership. Mason stepped back, his eyes wide. Lindsay froze, her hand hovering over the keyboard. Alexander reached the podium but ignored the stunned employees. Instead, he scanned the gate area, quickly locating Jim Mallory seated by the window. Approaching Jim, Alexander knelt slightly, extending his hand. "Major James Mallory, sir," he began in a voice both formal and filled with genuine remorse. "I am Alexander Reed, president of Pacific Skies Airlines. I have come personally to offer my deepest apologies on behalf of our company." Jim slowly stood, his expression neutral but attentive. "We have just been made aware of your unacceptable treatment," Alexander continued. "The downgrade of your ticket and the way you were spoken to were entirely against our core values. It was a failure of both our system and our people. It should never have happened, especially to someone of your service and sacrifice." The surrounding passengers listened, captivated. "I promise, Major, this will be corrected immediately. You will be reinstated in first class, and our flight will not leave without you comfortably on board." For the first time that day, a flicker of relief softened Jim's features. He nodded respectfully but said nothing, letting the CEO's words hang in the air, heavy with accountability and overdue respect. As the words of apology echoed in the stunned silence, Alexander Reed straightened and turned toward the podium. His sharp gaze fell directly on Lindsay. "Agent," he said, his tone turning colder, "we will be having a very serious conversation about policy interpretation and customer care as soon as this aircraft departs." Lindsay's face drained of color. She stood frozen, unable to meet his eyes. Alexander continued, addressing the gate staff and the gathering crowd. "Effective immediately. Major Mallory is to be escorted back to first class. Reconfigure the seating if necessary." "This mistake will not stand," passengers murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how the airline had allowed the situation to reach this point. Mason stepped hesitantly forward, finding his voice. "I can personally escort Major Mallory, sir." Alexander nodded approvingly. "Thank you." Turning back to Jim, Alexander softened his tone. "Major, not only will your seat be restored, but your entire journey and any future travel with Pacific Skies for you and your family will be fully complimentary. It is the very least we can do." The crowd burst into quiet applause as Mason gently guided Jim toward the boarding lane reserved for first-class passengers. Passengers watched with respect as Jim walked with steady dignity. Head held high, Alexander remained standing at the podium, arms crossed, eyes still locked on Lindsay as she shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the moment. The atmosphere at Gate C17 transformed as Major Jim Mallory walked steadily toward the boarding lane. The once apathetic passengers now stood, many removing their hats or placing hands over their hearts in silent tribute. Several quietly whispered among themselves, recognizing the gravity of what had just unfolded. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A young serviceman in uniform snapped to attention and offered a crisp salute as Jim passed. Mason walked respectfully beside Jim, keeping a measured pace. As they neared the jet bridge, a first-class passenger willingly stepped aside, motioning for Jim to proceed ahead with a nod of admiration. Jim acknowledged the gesture with a simple, respectful nod. The dignity he carried radiated throughout the gate, shifting the collective mood from disinterest to reverence. Back at the podium, Lindsay remained rooted in place, pale and shaken under the intense scrutiny of her peers and fellow passengers. Alexander Reed stood calmly, his arms folded, watching the boarding process with a stern expression. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. This incident would become a turning point for how the airline treated its honored passengers. As the plane door finally closed behind Jim, a soft ripple of applause swept the gate. It was not for the airline, but for the man who had quietly endured, who had stood not just for himself, but for every forgotten hero who had been overlooked and disrespected. The next morning, behind the closed doors of Pacific Skies Airlines corporate offices, a tense meeting was underway. Lindsay stood stiffly before Alexander Reed and two senior vice presidents. Her uniform, once immaculate, now seemed to hang heavier under the weight of the scrutiny. Alexander's voice was calm but firm. "Agent, your handling of Major Mallory's case was unacceptable. Not only was it a breach of company policy regarding distinguished veterans, but it was also a failure of basic human decency." Lindsay opened her mouth to protest, but Reed raised a hand to silence her. "You will be immediately removed from customer-facing duties and placed into mandatory retraining focused on veteran assistance protocols and customer empathy," he continued. "Additionally, we are initiating the Mallerie Protocol to ensure this never happens again. The Mallerie Protocol would mandate that any service issues involving highly decorated veterans or distinguished service members be escalated directly to the executive level." Reed's tone softened only slightly. "This incident could have been prevented with compassion and common sense. You chose to follow rules without considering the person standing before you. That will not be tolerated at Pacific Skies." Lindsay nodded silently, her face pale, realizing the full consequences of her decisions. As the meeting adjourned, the executives exchanged glances, fully aware that this case had set a powerful precedent for the entire company moving forward. Back at Newport International Airport, Mason stood near the now quiet Gate C17, still replaying the events of the day before in his mind. To his surprise, a senior operations manager approached him with a small envelope. "Mason, the executive team asked me to give you this." Inside was a handwritten note from Alexander Reed himself. "Mason, your awareness and quiet concern for Major Mallory did not go unnoticed. While you may not have intervened directly, your instincts were right, and we expect our people to have the courage to act in the future. Thank you for upholding the values we strive to build at Pacific Skies. Alexander Reed. Mason folded the note carefully, feeling a mixture of pride and newfound responsibility. Meanwhile, at Pacific Skies' Heroes Liaison desk, Daniel received internal commendation from the leadership team. His quick escalation and calm professionalism had helped avert a far greater scandal. Daniel smiled humbly as he read the email of thanks. "Just doing my job," he whispered, then returned his focus to the next call. For Jim Mallory, the events at the airport were already fading behind him. He had never sought recognition and continued to carry himself with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire life. The ripples of the incident, however, would continue to inspire Pacific Skies staff to be more vigilant, compassionate, and willing to stand up for what is right. The morning sun bathed the quiet streets of Cedar Falls as Jim Mallory stepped onto his front porch, a cup of black coffee in hand. The crisp air and familiar sounds of birdsong offered a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the previous day. Jim had not mentioned the airport incident to Tommy. He saw no reason to cloud his grandson's good intentions with the unpleasant details. But word traveled quickly. Later that afternoon, Jim's phone rang. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Tommy's concerned voice came through. "I heard something happened at the airport." Jim chuckled softly, the warmth of home easing the tension he hadn't even realized he carried. "Just a little turbulence at the gate, son. Nothing a few good people couldn't straighten out." Tommy exhaled in relief. "I'm so sorry, and Grandpa. I tried to make sure everything went smoothly." "You did everything right, Tommy," Jim reassured him. "And thanks to you, I'll be at Liberty Hall as planned." As the call ended, Jim leaned back in his chair, gazing out over the rolling fields. The horizon seemed endless, just like the quiet strength and humility that had defined his life. The incident at the airport was over, but the lesson remained even in modern systems driven by automation and profit. There were still individuals willing to act with integrity and compassion. Jim sipped his coffee slowly, content in knowing that dignity and respect had, once again, prevailed. In the weeks that followed, the incident at Gate C17 reverberated far beyond the walls of Newport International Airport. News of Pacific Skies. Airline's swift and decisive action spread quickly across veterans networks and social media. Military organizations, veterans advocacy groups, and airline industry analysts publicly praised the company's establishment of the Mallerie Protocol, a first-of-its-kind internal policy. The Mallerie Protocol mandated that any seating or service disputes involving highly decorated veterans or active duty service members be escalated immediately to senior leadership, bypassing standard customer service channels. The announcement was accompanied by the unveiling of a dedicated Heroes Liaison hotline, available 247 for veterans flying with Pacific Skies Airlines. At a press conference, Alexander Reed addressed reporters with a solemn but determined tone. Major Mallory's experience reminded us that systems without compassion are broken. The Mallerie Protocol ensures that our company will always recognize and respect those who have sacrificed for our nation. The policy was implemented company-wide within days, with employees from ground staff to flight crews undergoing mandatory training on veteran sensitivity and customer care. The internal culture at Pacific Skies Airlines shifted. Employees began to feel empowered to speak up and take action when something felt wrong, knowing they had the support of senior leadership. For many, it was more than just a policy change. It marked the beginning of a renewed commitment to empathy and respect in an industry often criticized for rigid rules and impersonal service. The ripple effect of the Mallerie Protocol spread beyond Pacific Skies Airlines. Other major carriers began reviewing their internal procedures after witnessing the overwhelming positive public response. Several airlines contacted Pacific Skies to learn how they had structured the program. Veterans groups and active duty service organizations sent letters of gratitude to Alexander Reed and his team, acknowledging the airline's willingness to lead by example. Inside Pacific Skies, employees reported a renewed sense of pride. Flight attendants, gate agents, and pilots shared stories of how they had applied the new training to offer extra care and assistance to military passengers. The Heroes Liaison hotline, once rarely used, became a vital support tool. Calls ranged from seat assignment issues to requests for wheelchair services and help with tight connections. Mason, now promoted to a training liaison role, traveled across major hubs, sharing his personal experience from Gate C17 and encouraging staff to remember the human being behind every boarding pass. At an internal company awards event, Daniel from the Heroes Desk received recognition for his pivotal role in quickly escalating Major Mallory's case. As Pacific Skies embraced the changes, the airline's customer satisfaction scores began to climb. The story of Major Jim Mallory's quiet dignity had sparked a movement of compassion within an industry known for rigid policies and cold procedures. Months later, the transformation sparked by Major Mallory's ordeal continued to resonate. Pacific Skies Airlines unveiled a new internal award named the Mallerie Honor, dedicated to employees who demonstrated exceptional compassion and advocacy for passengers. The first recipient was a young flight attendant who had gone above and beyond to help a disabled veteran navigate a complex flight itinerary. Her humility in accepting the award mirrored the very spirit of Jim Mallory. In partnership with veterans organizations, Pacific Skies also launched an annual Heroes Recognition Flight program, providing complimentary travel to distinguished veterans attending commemorative events across the country. At the inaugural event, Alexander Reed spoke to a packed audience of service members and airline employees. "We cannot undo the mistake made at Gate C17," he admitted, "but we can honor the lesson it taught us." This program is our ongoing promise to every veteran who entrusts us with their journey. The Heroes Liaison Desk, once a little-known support channel, had become an industry model, with other airlines beginning to establish similar dedicated veteran services. Back home in Cedar Falls, Jim Mallory remained largely unaware of the waves his quiet stand had made. To him, he had simply endured a small indignity with patience and integrity. But for countless veterans who followed, Major Mallory's moment of silent resolve had become a symbol of dignity reclaimed. The wheels of Flight 851 touched down smoothly at Washington Dulles International Airport under a brilliant morning sky. As Major Jim Mallory stepped into the jet bridge, the flight crew silently lined up along the cabin door. One by one, each crew member offered a respectful nod or a quiet, "Thank you for your service, sir." Jim nodded humbly in return, his steps steady despite the lingering pain in his back. His travel had been comfortable, but the weight of memory and duty never left him. Walking through the terminal, Jim was met by a small group of veterans and volunteers holding welcome signs for the arriving heroes. The sight brought a faint, knowing smile to his weathered face. Tommy stood at the far end of the crowd, waving. As Jim approached, his grandson embraced him tightly. "You made it," Tommy whispered. Jim patted his back gently. "I told you I would." Together, they walked toward the exit, side by side. Neither spoke of what had happened at Newport. For them, this moment was about something bigger: the journey, the respect, the quiet acknowledgement of sacrifice. As they disappeared into the bustling flow of travelers, the camera lingered on the now empty jet bridge and the soft flutter of the American flag nearby. The story of Major James Mallory is not just about an airline error. It is about the enduring power of respect, dignity, and compassion in a world too often driven by rules and profit. As Jim and Tommy disappeared into the crowd at Washington Dulles, their journey symbolized something greater: the idea that even the smallest act of recognition can restore faith in humanity. No system is perfect. Mistakes will happen, but how we respond defines who we are. Pacific Skies Airlines, after failing a single passenger, chose to own that failure and build a better path forward. In doing so, they reminded us all of an important truth: respect is not measured by loyalty points or first-class upgrades. True honor lies in recognizing those who have sacrificed far more than most of us will ever understand. Major Mallory never asked to be treated differently. He simply wanted to be seen as a person, as a veteran, as someone whose quiet sacrifices mattered. And in the end, thanks to a single call and the willingness of others to act, justice was not only served, but a legacy of better service was born. Let this be a reminder: kindness, empathy, and respect for others require no policy, only the courage to do what is right. The camera fades on the busy terminal, the soft glow of sunlight reflecting off the terminal windows, as life continues, but with the hope that one small stand made a lasting difference. If you believe that every hero deserves respect, dignity, and the chance to travel with honor, we invite you to be part of this movement. Stories like Major James Mallory's remind us that justice and compassion can still prevail, even in the most unexpected places. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that restored your faith in people? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. Let's create a community that values empathy, integrity, and doing what's right. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful, real-life story. At Unveiled Wealth, we are committed to sharing narratives that inspire change and celebrate the quiet heroes among us. Thank you for watching. Remember, one voice, one action, one person can make all the difference. See you in the next video.